Nahlor Vreed, the Prince of Spite, also called the Thorn-tongued Heir, a pale-skinned, red-eyed albino noble whose very presence chills the air. From the Killer and Keeper universe. Origin. The albino nature of Ivory Thorns' ruling class has become a symbol of sacred detachment and refined cruelty across Velshakar. Their pallid skin and crimson or pearl eyes are not only seen as signs of ancient bloodlines, but are believed to reflect the moon's forgotten light. To outsiders, their appearance is both revered and feared, ghostly silhouettes who walk without shadows. Among common folk, stories circulate of albino nobles whose reflections whisper and whose touch leaches color from the world. Some believe their blood carries ancestral curses or arcane immunity, and none doubt the presence they command in court or on the battlefield. Ivory Thorns, an albino-ruled, shadow-cloaked kingdom resting in the central plains of a far western continent called Velshakar, where silvergrass meadows hide sinkholes of brine and bone-colored hills give way to glacial rivers that steam under moonlight. Lightning rarely touches these lands, but the soil is laced with salt and old blood, making it fertile for bitter roots and bitterer hearts. Distant from the birthlands of the lightning beast Atlas and his sister, the high healer Tekka. Ruled by albino lords such as Lady Ira Vainstill of the Bleeding Gate, a matron with ivory dreadlocks and crimson-stained robes who orchestrates state funerals and poisons noble lineages with slow ritual precision. Lord Vosk Terran of the Brinehold, a hulking albino with salt-crusted skin, blind pearl eyes, and a voice like water churning through stone, who commands the kingdom's sea-bound pacts and ship fleets, and the cunning Lord Marn Velith of Miracrag, a slender whisperer wrapped in reflective silks, whose snow-white hair is braided with thorns, and whose face remains ever masked. He governs memory trade and spycraft with a smile never shown. Its court thrives on cruelty as currency, where betrayal is more refined than diplomacy. History of Ivory Thorns. Once a scattering of highland strongholds, Ivory Thorns was unified under the first Pale Queen, Velessa the Bleak, a statuesque woman with ash-white skin veined faintly in violet, and hair like woven cobwebs threaded with pearls. Her eyes were pale onyx, and her presence alone could still a banquet hall. Unflinchingly cold, but never cruel without purpose. She spoke softly and rarely, but every word set policy or buried a rival. Velessa's cunning was legendary. She seduced a dozen warlords not with flesh, but with prophecy, and broke them with truths wrapped in riddles. She forged the kingdom not with steel, but with secrets, creating the Pact of the Ivory Crown, a magically binding agreement that turned private vendettas into whispered deterrents. Each lord who signed it did so over the corpse of their ambition, and she wore their oaths like armor. Her reign was one of eerie peace, held together not by loyalty, but by fear of her remembering. In her final days, Velessa withdrew to the Echo Keep, a frost-veiled monastery perched above the glacier veins, where she conversed with the dead through cracked mirrors and burned each of her journals in reverse order. She took no advisors, saw no heirs, and spoke only to a pale fox that followed her like a shadow. On the day of her death, a thunderless quake cracked the palace foundation. No body was found. Instead, a pearl-thorned crown lay on her bloodless throne, weeping violet sap. Some claim she became memory incarnate, a curse walking unseen among those who betrayed her pact. After she bound the 12 feuding houses with a single curse, any blood spilled within the throne chamber would return to haunt its spiller. Thus, diplomacy sharpened into a deadlier blade than war. The kingdom has never waged open conflict. It thrives instead on subtlety, rumor, and ceremonial executions performed as theater. Factions. The Thorned Cabinet, a ruling body of 7 nobles who each hold an ancestral secret capable of destroying one another. These secrets are never spoken aloud, but etched into bone keepsakes and hidden in vaults beneath their ancestral manors. Lord Terran's secret is said to be the truth of his mother's assassination, orchestrated by his own hand. Lady Vainstill hides a whispered pact made with a forgotten deity of sorrow in exchange for her unaging face. Lord Veleth's secret is a recorded memory, one that shows him sabotaging the Pale Queen's final rites, an act of ambition veiled as loyalty. The others remain nameless by design, cloaked in rumor and dread. They speak only in riddles and wear masks of pearl to hide the trembling truths behind their smiles, of destroying one another. They speak only in riddles and wear masks of pearl. The Varnish Choir, a cult of whisper priests who believe beauty is born only through pain. They oversee funerals, births, and coronations, all with blade in hand. Their daily lives are steeped in ritual. Mornings begin with scarification prayers, where each member cuts a new line into their flesh to mark the sins of the realm. They eat little, subsisting mostly on bitter tea brewed from thorn leaf and salted root. They move in silence through the halls of the dead, inscribing names onto polished bone tablets by candlelight. Their only music is the sound of weeping, which they record in crystal files and store in the Echo Vault. They sleep in stone cots, heads shaven, dreams disturbed by the cries of those they have buried and baptized in blood. The Crimson Archive, an order of memory smiths who extract, sell, and weaponize memories for political gain. Their trade operates through vain parlors, gilded, soundproof salons where nobles exchange recollections as currency. Crimson Archive agents siphon memories using silver needles dipped in forget-me ink, storing them in glass files sealed with glyphs. These memories are then auctioned in secret markets, where bidders include spies, blackmailers, and lovers of forbidden knowledge. High-value memories, like royal scandals or prophetic dreams, are treated like relics and secured in vaults beneath Mirror Crag. Archive scribes are forbidden to speak above a whisper, and their tongues are branded with a vow sigil to prevent betrayal. The Hollow Suns, an underground movement seeking to overthrow the ruling caste and restore the original clans exiled by the Pale Queen. Led by twin siblings Kael and Ressa Malvorn, the Hollow Suns splinter into 2 major ideological wings. Kael, a former noble-turned-wraith forger, believes in gradual infiltration, aiming to rot the aristocracy from within by manipulating archives and seducing memory brokers. Ressa, once a firebrand street prophet, rallies the dispossessed and calls for immediate insurrection through blood oaths and warfare. Their rivalry threatens to tear the movement apart. Kael views Ressa's methods as reckless martyrdom, while Ressa sees Kael's schemes as cowardice draped in silk. Their followers clash often in secret, poisoned tongues in manor cellars versus masked riots in the ash markets. Still, both factions are united in one goal: ending the era of the Thorned Tongue and restoring the names that history dared to erase. One of their current missions, codenamed Glassburn, targets a noble-held archive beneath Mirror Crag. Kael's faction has seeded false documents in the memory auctions to trigger a fabricated scandal that implicates Lord Veleth in heretic rituals. While court attention turns inward, Ressa's faction plans to sabotage the Vein Parlor's main reservoir, releasing stored grief memories into the Manor District. The chaos is timed to a masked festival when city guards are thinned. Their goal, to force nobles into open panic, creating a pretext to smuggle refugees and smuggle agents into the heart of the capital. The risk is immense, and not all Hollow Suns agree on the cost. But the operation proceeds, whispered through ash markets and etched into the handles of smuggled knives. When Glassburn ignites, the results are immediate and devastating. The grief memories unleashed by Ressa's saboteurs flood the Manor District, overwhelming nobles and staff alike with unbearable sorrow, hallucinations of past traumas, and forgotten betrayals. Servants tear at their eyes. A duel erupts in the Vein Court, ending in blood. 2 members of the Thorned cabinet are hospitalized, one weeping over a child they never had, another confessing to ancestral treason in front of horrified kin. Lord Velith vanishes that night, leaving only a cracked mask and a pool of ink on the marble stairs of Mirror Crag. Kyle's agents claim his memory vaults, siphoning troves of secrets. Refugees are smuggled in through the chaos under the guise of caretakers, their skin marked with thorns of ash. But the repercussions spread wider. The Varnish choir declares the event a heretical reckoning and begins nightly lament processions across the capital. Lady Vainstill calls for a purge of archivists and begins boiling her tea in blessed bone. Worst of all, a splinter faction within the Hollow Suns breaks off, disgusted by the collateral misery. They call themselves the Grey Accord and vow to wage war not just on the nobles, but on Kyle and Ressa too, seeing them now as twisted reflections of the cruelty they oppose. Ivory Thorns reels, and in the cracks, something ancient stirs, something that remembers the taste of forgotten grief. Maps and landscape, Velshakar is divided by 9 natural dominions: the salt-torn wastes, the riverglass reach, the bleeding thickets, the glacier veins, the verdant blight, a fungal jungle pulsing with bioluminescent decay. The whispering flats, a wind-scoured expanse where voices travel farther than sound. The bone-glow fen, swamps where ancestral bones light paths at night. The Mirror Step Barrens, a desert of reflective dust that disorients navigation. And the Hollow Skeld, a mountainous region riddled with forgotten fortresses and soundless avalanches. The Hollow Skeld is home to the Skeldborn, reclusive mountaineers with alabaster skin and jagged black tattoos, said to be descended from exiled fortress keepers. They dwell in echo-wrought halls, carved into ice-veined stone, living by a rigid code of silence and memory. Among their fiercest protectors is Thorned of the Unyielding Silence, a warrior born during an avalanche and believed to be its chosen voice. He bears a black iron glaive carved with sigils of forgetting, and wears armor made from frostbone and chain-forged glacier glass. Thorn patrols the sacred ridges of Haldrak Hold, an ancient keep said to have once housed a library of vanished gods. Now it serves as a sanctum for oath-binding rituals and memory duels. Ritual combat where warriors exchange fragments of truth instead of blood. Thorn has never lost such a duel, and his silence is revered as an oracular force. Some believe he guards not just the hold, but the final memory of the Pale Queen, sealed beneath Haldrak's lowest chamber. Their society revolves around oath burial rituals and dream mapping, and they believe each avalanche carries a prophecy meant for a chosen listener. Strangers are watched, but rarely spoken to, unless they carry bone-etched tokens proving kinship or penance. Among these, The Riverglass Reach carries a myth as enduring as its waters. Locals whisper of the Bride of the Drowned Light, a spectral woman in bridal veils woven from river foam, who appears to the hopeless just before dawn. Those who follow her vanish, but the rare ones who return claim she offers glimpses of forgotten futures or second chances in exchange for a secret, willingly drowned. In the Bone-Glow Fen, elders tell tales of the Lantern-born, skeletal guardians risen from ancestral bones that pulse with memory light, protectors or punishers, depending on the purity of one's lineage. The Whispering Flats are said to be haunted by the Echo Eater, a soundless predator that devours spoken truth, leaving liars mute and honest men babbling. Each dominion births its own folklore, often too alive to be mere legend. The Salt-Torn Wastes are home to the Brinejack clans, salt-hardened nomads who believe their ancestors were once sea gods punished for pride. They wear cracked masks and tattoo their tongues with tide glyphs. The Bleeding Thickets shelter the root-bound, feral mystics who drink tree sap visions and communicate by thorn script carved into their skin. They are rumored to cultivate sentient flora to guard their glades. The Verdant Blight teems with the spore-borne, mycelial hybrids that blur the line between plant and person. They live in fungal symbiosis and emit pheromonal stories instead of words. In the Whispering Flats, the Dune Whisperers build wind towers to trap and decipher voices from the air. Each family guards a sacred silence broken only when the winds scream true. Bone-Glow Fen is claimed by the Lantern Wives, spectral midwives who guide souls to their rest with bone lanterns and blood lullabies. They accept no payment but memory. The Mirror Step Barrens are stalked by dust shepherds, loners clad in reflective robes who navigate by echo rather than sight, collecting the lost with songs hummed backwards. The Glacier Veins remain largely uninhabited, save for isolated frost oracles who dream in permafrost and speak only in weather changes. And the Riverglass Reach hosts rivertide hermits and drown-touched pilgrims seeking redemption or riddles in its mirrored currents. Each region breathes its people, and in return, they carve their legends into Velshakar's aching skin. Ivory Thorns lies at the crossroads of these realms, its towers rising from salt-crusted cliffs beneath a permanently bruised sky. Regional threats: the Brinejack Scourge, salt-mutated raiders from the Salt-Torn Wastes who ride drought worms and bleed saltwater. Once few and nomadic, they have since multiplied, driven by prophetic droughts and tidal omens. Their infestation now spreads beyond the Salt-Torn Wastes into the outer bones of Ivory Thorns, pillaging trade routes and seeding salt runes into fertile ground to corrupt the land. Their presence is marked by dried wells, salt-burnt crops, and the eerie hiss of worm-hide sails on the horizon. Some say they are no longer entirely mortal, but a living plague animated by the fury of the dead sea gods they claim as ancestors. Their leader, Salt Mother Axira, is an ancient matriarch who has replaced her blood with brine and her bones with coral glass. She leads from a throne grown from a beached leviathan's ribcage, attended by drought priests who read tidal bones and flens the unworthy. Her voice causes dehydration in those who hear it unshielded. The Brinejack's worm steeds, drought worms, are immense serpentine beasts bred in salt pits beneath the cracked seabeds. With hides tough as driftwood and spines that exhale steam, they traverse dunes like waves. They hunt by heat and salt, and their breath desiccates flesh on contact. The largest, called Hollowfin, is said to have swallowed a chapel whole, and now echoes with hymns of those entombed within. 50 years ago, the Brinejack Scourge launched their first siege on Ivory Thorns, led by Salt Mother Axira herself, then newly transformed and whispering in the brine tongue. Their drought worms burrowed beneath the salt cliffs, surfacing inside the outer court of Hollow Marrow Keep. They sowed chaos using salt bombs and grief mirages conjured from stolen memories. However, the siege was repelled by a coalition of the Thorned Cabinet and the Varnish Choir. A forbidden relic, Valessa's Vein, a relic dagger made from her spine, was unsheathed by Lady Vainstill, and its presence alone turned the worms against their riders. The Brinejacks were driven back to the wastes, nursing wounds and curses. Now they return more numerous and far more cunning. Their tactics have evolved into layered assaults, drought mists that evaporate watchfires, illusion tides that mimic friendly banners, and whisper worms that transmit false orders. Salt Mother Axira no longer fights to conquer alone. She fights to drown history, claiming that Ivory Thorns must be returned to the ocean beneath the soil. The whale herds, small spirit-bound exiles of the Riverglass Reach who trap souls in bone flutes. Sightings are exceptionally rare. Most believe them to be a superstition told to silence weeping children. When glimpsed, it is always at twilight or mistfall, on the cusp of forgetfulness. They leave no footprints, only faint trails of music that vanish as soon as they are heard. Entire villages have claimed to hear their flutes for weeks before a great sorrow befalls them, and some say to listen too long is to become part of their next tune. Their origin traces back to a betrayed sect of funeral singers who refused to let the dead be forgotten. Cast into the river's depths with mouths sewn shut, they were bound to instruments crafted from their own bones, and now drift between the worlds of memory and mourning. They are drawn to unresolved grief and forbidden mourning rites. One tale speaks of Kalen, a lantern-bearer's apprentice, who followed a whale herd's melody deep into the mist one sorrow-heavy night. He was never found, but years later, a single bone flute washed ashore, carved with the image of Kalen's face mid-song. Those who hear its tune claim to recall memories not their own, and sometimes speak in the voice of the dead. Entire villages have claimed to hear their flutes for weeks before a great sorrow befalls them, and some say to listen too long is to become part of their next tune. Felvine wretches, creatures grown from corrupted roots in the bleeding thickets. They whisper names as they stalk. Native creatures, thornmares, pale six-legged horses with spined backs and silent hooves used by noble assassins. The most feared of these riders was Vexil Mar, known as the Needle in the Fog. Wrapped in silence weave and riding a thorn mare named Bleedstep, Vexil was said to move between raindrops and never strike twice, because once was always enough. He claimed over 100 high-blood targets during the Thorned Schism and vanished after each kill, leaving only a vine of black petals. Some say he still rides when spite is stirred, called by unspoken oaths and sealed mirrors. His most legendary contract was the assassination of Grand Archivist Seraph Knoll, a memory seer who wore a crown of unwept tears and could recite a man's lineage from a single breath. Vexil infiltrated the Crimson Archive during the Night of 100 Whispers, eluding every ward and sentinel. Seraph Knoll's last words, as recorded in a weeping file, were, "He stepped through my silence." Vexil disappeared shortly after that contract. Some believe he was taken by the choir as penance for silencing Knoll's sacred breath. Others say he entered the Pale Queen's final memory vault and never emerged, becoming its last guardian. A rare few whisper that he rides still, waiting for the name that matches his own. so he may end his tale with a final, perfect strike. Only one soul dares summon him now. Siren Duskveil, a blind archivist from the Hollow Sun's Grey Accord, who has memorized the silence runes from Seraph Noel's dying breath. Siren believes that Vexil Mar is the only one capable of halting the rise of Salt Mother Axira, and is willing to sacrifice their voice, name, and final memory to do it. Under a mirrorless moon, Siren prepares the rite of reversal, in which the assassin's name is sung backward into still water laced with regret. But even Siren knows, to call the needle in the fog is to wager not just a life, but a legacy. Velshade serpents, eyeless, ink-scaled snakes that nest beneath memory wells and feed on forgotten dreams. Their venom is a psychic agent known as Whisperblot, which corrodes the victim's sense of identity and memory. Those envenomed experience dreamlike hallucinations, reliving buried regrets or false lives with unsettling clarity. The venom cannot be countered by traditional means. Only a memory willingly sacrificed to the well can purge it. Some aristocrats seek out controlled doses of Whisperblot to forget grief or reforge themselves anew, while assassins brew it into kiss blades for irreversible erasure. Its black market trade is a labyrinthine economy. Whisperblot is sold in hushed exchanges through the Pale Vintners, a covert guild who store the venom in hollow rings, crystal rosaries, or perfume flasks shaped like tears. Transactions take place in silence, often by passing coded objects like torn lace or blood-inked paper cranes. Entire auction nights are held in hidden chambers beneath memory theaters, where bidders offer not coin, but truths, names, or years of their own lives. The most potent variants, such as Queen's Maw and Gutterglow, fetch entire legacies in price. Anyone caught trafficking in Whisperblot publicly is executed with a silencing spike through the tongue. But this only makes the poison more desirable to those desperate to disappear. One such case unfolded with tragic precision. The buyer, Lady Kirill Vanth, a disgraced noble who sought to erase the memory of her child's betrayal. The seller, a pale vintner known only as Ashlace, a faceless broker whose perfume flask vials were famed in the ink-gilded underworld. Their meeting took place beneath a shuttered bathhouse, timed to the tolling of bells at a morning festival. Unbeknownst to both, the Hollow Suns had infiltrated the venue, aiming to coerce Ashlace into forging an alliance. But the Grey Accord arrived first, aiming to purge all Whisperblot sellers. What followed was a bust gone wrong. Veins wept chaos. Ashlace bit down on a vial of Queen's Maw, unleashing a cloud of psychic fog that twisted memories mid-thought. Lady Vanth staggered from the room, screaming her wedding vows in reverse. 3 Grey Accord enforcers forgot their own mission and tried to marry the same corpse. When the fog cleared, only a single tear-shaped flask remained, sealed in silence. Its content, the final memory of Ashlace whispered backward, still bargaining for mercy. Scarn owls, featherless nocturnal birds that mimic the last words of the dead. They are known to perch outside the windows of the grief-stricken, softly cooing, familiar voices into the dark. Many who hear the phantom last words of a lost loved one become entranced, wandering into the night in search of a reunion. These individuals are found days later, lifeless and curled beneath the owls' nests, smiling, eyes wide, and mouths full of feathers. Scarn owls lure with love, but feed on longing, nesting where despair is thickest and leaving silence behind. One tale tells of a widow named Marith Ellen who resisted their call. Each night for a fortnight, a Scarn owl cooed her late husband's final words outside her shuttered window. Forgive me, Mari. I should have stayed. Driven to the edge of madness, Marith instead wrote the words backward in ash across her walls and lit a silence lantern crafted by the Varnish choir. The owl vanished. Years later, she became a grief warder, shielding others from spectral lures. But not all resist. Thol Bran, a merchant whose daughter drowned in the Reach, followed the cooing voice into the mist. Days later, his body was found kneeling beneath a scarn nest, mouth open in a scream that never ended, his hands clutched around a ribbon she once wore. The ribbon was wet, no water nearby. Connections to other realms. Thirenal. Trade envoys risk crossing the Riverglass Reach to acquire dream silk and cursed ink from Ivory Thorns. The Red Dunes of Ellerin. Fugitives from Ivory Thorns have fled into the Ellerin Dunes, forming a splinter sect known as the Saltthorn Apostates, who blend desert zealotry with spite-born rituals. Kareth Archipelago. Mercenaries from the Bloodchain Sons occasionally ally with Hollow Sons in sabotage campaigns against the Thorned Cabinet. The continent of Orevar. Whispered rumors tell of exiled nobles from Ivory Thorns founding a new cult in the mountain-spined east, calling themselves the Pale Seed. Personality, charismatic and cunning, the albinistic Nahlor Vreed's kindness is often venom, a calculated performance masking deeper malice. He inflicts suffering in subtle, brutal ways, orchestrating betrayals with a smile and crafting ruin behind gestures of apparent goodwill. Many who have encountered him speak of sleepless nights and silent dread, for his vengeance rarely shouts, it whispers. Nobles avoid his gaze, fearing what favors he might offer. Courtiers rehearse their words thrice, lest they stumble into his good graces and never recover. His presence alone stirs unease, as though the air itself knows it treads on dangerous ground. Tales abound of courtiers who fled the capital after a single conversation, and of noble heirs who tore out their own tongues rather than answer his questions. Examples: he once gifted a rival a rare, enchanted dagger, knowing it bore a hidden curse that would slowly corrode the mind. When asked about the rival's subsequent madness, he replied with a gentle laugh, "Some men simply can't handle power." In court, he publicly defended a political opponent against false accusations he himself had planted. The opponent, stripped of honor and too stunned to protest, whispered, "Why?" To which he calmly responded, "Because mercy leaves a deeper scar." He helped rebuild a burnt village, only to have the materials laced with slow-decaying rot. When the homes collapsed months later, he offered aid again, saying, "Let me help you stand taller this time." During a festival in Miracrag, he praised Lady Vainstill in a public toast, citing her immortal beauty and unfailing loyalty. That night, 4 archivists turned up dead, each with a glass vial in their mouths, labeled with Vainstill's name. No evidence traced back to him, yet her influence in the Crimson Archive never recovered. Expanded scene. Int Royal Courtroom, day. The Grand Chamber buzzes with tension as nobles whisper behind silken fans and armored guards stand like statues. At the center, Lord Halvin, the accused, kneels in chains before the throne. The prosecutor holds up forged letters planted by the very man now stepping forward in Halvin's defense. Nahlor Vreed softly to the king. "My liege, I have reviewed these claims myself. They lack the weight of truth. Lord Halvin may be prideful, but he is no traitor." Murmurs ripple through the court. The prosecutor scowls. "King, you vouch for him. knowing the charges. Nahlor Vreed, smiling. I vouch only for what I know, and what I know is that a man's legacy should not be buried under the weight of suspicion without proof. The king nods slowly. The accusations are dismissed. Halvin is freed, but his reputation lies in ruin, his allies gone. Outside the court, Halvin confronts the one who saved him. Halvin, hoarse. You did this. Why help me? Nahlor Vreed, softly. Because I needed you broken, not dead. A ghost of a man speaks louder than a corpse. He walks away, leaving Halvin in stunned silence. That evening, whispers spread faster than wine, of the Prince of Spite and the man who wept at his mercy. Ideology. Spite lasts longer than justice. Raised within the cold courts of Ivory Thorns, a lineage of albinistic nobility known for their pale skin and crimson eyes. In their society, appearance was both a mark of identity and a declaration of power. Fashion among the court was meticulously symbolic. Nobles wore robes of bone-white silk threaded with crimson veins, their pallor highlighted by reflective sashes and collars of frost-dyed glass. Pearl masks were customary at high court, not to conceal, but to emphasize the bloodless elegance expected of the elite. The fewer colors worn, the greater the prestige. Purity of pigment was a mark of influence. Makeup was forbidden. Any cosmetic that feigned a flush was considered deceitful and punishable by social exile. Only those of flawless, unpainted complexion could hold offices tied to memory, mourning, or justice. Their eyes were outlined with blood-leaf pigment during rituals to enhance their natural crimson gaze, seen as a divine gift of insight. Outsiders viewed these customs with a mix of awe and unease. Travelers spoke of the albinistic court as a place where ghosts ruled in flesh, where even laughter felt rehearsed and smiles masked venom. To many foreign dignitaries, the fashion of Ivory Thorns resembled funeral attire more than regalia, an elegance draped in dread. Rumors spread that their masks were cursed to remember secrets, that their garments whispered accusations if touched. Ambassadors often left trembling, claiming their reflections looked back at them differently after attending court. Some kingdoms forbade their own nobles from donning white in court after visiting, fearing they might invite the ire or imitation of the Thorned cabinet. Among traders and bards, the court was called the White Mausoleum, where diplomacy bled slower than war, and beauty was always edged in threat. Even in grief, they wore pale mourning attire adorned only with jet thorns, a reminder that their sorrow, like their vengeance, was silent and sharp. Nahlor Vreed learned that compassion was a currency easily forged, and vengeance, a blade that never dulled. From Lady Ira Vainstill's ceremonies of cruelty cloaked in grace, to Lord Veleth's mirrors that turned memory into threat, he absorbed the lesson that justice was theater, while spite shaped outcomes. The Pale Queen's legacy of secrets and deterrence, where every alliance was a loaded whisper and every smile a trap, instilled in him the belief that justice fades, but pain, properly nurtured, blooms eternal. He does not seek fairness because none was given to him, only lessons wrapped in riddles and punishments masked as tradition. In spite, he finds a continuity that justice cannot offer, a legacy of wounds carried forward with intention. Worldview: the world does not owe us fairness, only chances for revenge. For Nahlor Vreed, this belief is not a bitter conclusion. It is a compass by which he navigates every alliance, betrayal, and whispered oath. Its roots lie in one defining moment, the death of his childhood companion, Ivyr, a servant boy raised alongside him in the court of Mirrorcrag. Ivyr was the only one who spoke to Vreed without flattery or fear, and they often played among the reflection pools, sharing stolen bread and mocking the haughty lords. When Lord Veleth discovered that Ivyr had overheard a secret memory trade, he ordered the boy's memories extracted and his mind emptied, an execution masked as punishment. Nahlor begged for mercy. Veleth smiled and handed him the silver needle. "If you truly pity him," Veleth whispered, "do it cleanly." Nahlor did it. He watched Avyr's eyes go glassy and the last of their laughter dissolve into a file. From that moment, fairness became a lie he vowed never to believe in again. Spite, however. Spite was a memory no one could steal. He kept Avyr's file in a ring around his neck, unbroken, and whispered to it before every betrayal. It reminded him, kindness kills more surely than blades, and revenge is the only truth that remembers. Every major decision he made henceforth echoed with Avyr's silent end. When weighing the fate of a rival, he imagined Avyr's glassy stare. When sealing a pact with veiled threat, he whispered to the file around his neck. In this way, Ivyr became not just a memory, but a talisman, an eternal witness to every cruelty Vreed inflicted. He claimed lands not to rule, but to shame those who scorned him. He unmade alliances not out of strategy, but to ensure those who once underestimated him wept in regret. Even his famed patience, legendary in court, was no virtue. It was a slow blade, honed on the whetstone of a boy's stolen mind. Ivyr's fate was the axis upon which all his manipulations turned. He vowed no grief of his would go unanswered again. Instead, he would carve loss into others, until the world forgot what fairness even meant. In the lacquered halls of Ivory Thorns, he was never taught to expect kindness, only leverage. Fairness was an illusion wielded by those with masks of pearl and knives hidden in etiquette. Vreed learned young that mercy was a kind of cruelty for the weak, and that revenge, carefully cultivated, elegantly timed, was the only form of closure that the world respected. It was through revenge that his mentors retained power, through revenge that the Thorned cabinet kept balance, and through revenge that ghosts were remembered. To him, fairness implies expectation, and expectation is the first step toward weakness. But revenge? Revenge is earned, shaped, honed. It is the only justice that requires no permission. Weapon, spitelash, a rapier dipped in cursed blood that festers emotional wounds. In his youth, Nahlor Vreed wielded it with such uncanny grace that he became a legend in the dueling circuits of Ivory Thorns, winning 3 consecutive masked tournaments beneath the chandeliers of Hollowmarrow Hall. His fighting style was a dance of contempt, fluid, elegant, and laced with theatrical cruelty. Each strike was precise, not just to wound, but to humiliate, and he often ended matches with his opponent's pride more scarred than their flesh. Among the albino boys of noble blood, it was a cruel tradition. When cut across the face in a duel, they would pack the wound with horsehair, ensuring the scar would heal raised and vivid. This ritual, known as the Mark of Merit, was seen as a declaration of one's willingness to endure pain for legacy. Against their milk-pale skin, the scars stood out stark and theatrical, becoming not only signs of prowess, but visual declarations of cruelty endured and inflicted. The deeper the scar and the more distinguished its shape, the more honor was whispered behind closed fans and velvet masks. Some young nobles went so far as to reopen their wounds if the scar began to fade, adding fresh horsehair to deepen its ridge. On certain feast days, Elders would trace their old dueling scars in wine as they recited the names of rivals they had disgraced. Scar-shaping parlors even emerged in secret wings of dueling academies, where aesthetic pain was refined to high art. A scar was not just proof of survival, it was currency, a signature, a silent boast no court etiquette could disavow, a badge of vanity disguised as valor. Among the famed bearers of these grotesque tokens were duelists such as Theris Malcrane, whose spiral-shaped scar, encircling his left eye like a crimson halo, became known as the Gaze of Irony, supposedly earned after slaying a lover-turned-rival in a poetry duel. Varnal Sur, a brutal prodigy, bore a slash from jaw to brow that split his lip in permanent sneer, a mark earned while laughing mid-duel and refusing to parry. And Lady Enith Caro, rare among female duelists, carried a jagged scar from temple to chin she called her invitation line, claiming anyone bold enough to trace it with a finger had to either kiss her or kill her. Nahlor's own dueling scar, a faint silver line down his left cheek, was one of the most sought-after marks of admiration among his admirers. He never admitted whether it was packed with horsehair or not, but the curve of it, elegant and deliberate, made many suspect he had shaped it himself. One of his most infamous victories came against Sir Calith Mornvale, a noble champion known for never having bled in a duel, until Nahlor cut him with a flourish so delicate that Calith mistook it for a brush of fabric until blood stained his collar. Another came during the Silver Vow exhibition, where Nahlor bested twin duelists Elira and Vaneth Quor in a single synchronized bout, severing Vaneth's braid and Elira's confidence with the same spinning lunge. After each win, he would bow with theatrical courtesy, eyes gleaming with malice, as if to say, grace was his weapon, and he had already won before blades even met. Companion, Vrin, a mute girl bound by blood to record his lies. She is the only person he ever truly cared for, a quiet presence who bore witness to his cruelties not with judgment, but with unwavering, painful loyalty. Her silence anchored him in ways words never could. He once said to her, "You are my echo, not my shadow. You remember me better than I deserve." Vrin was born during a lunar eclipse in the salt-washed ruins of Brynhold's orphan sanctum, her tongue ritually severed as part of a failed divination rite meant to create a living vessel for prophetic silence. Albino like the nobles of Ivory Thorns, she bore the same milk-pale skin and snow-blanched hair, marking her both sacred and accursed in equal measure. Abandoned and presumed cursed, she was later found by Nahlor during a memory market raid in the vein parlors. Instead of discarding her as others would have, he saw a reflection of stillness he longed to trust. He bound her to himself through a blood pact using a vial of Avir's preserved memory, the only thing he had ever hesitated to weaponize. From that moment, Vrin became both archive and confidant, recording his every deception in a script only the dead could read, etched onto skin scrolls she kept beneath her robes. Her abilities were unsettling yet precise. She could translate lies into visual sigils that only reflected the truth when bathed in sorrow or firelight. Though voiceless, she communicated through gesture and expression so refined it made courtiers feel transparent. Some said she dreamt in confessions. Others whispered that she carried the last unspoken thought of every person Nahlor had ruined. Despite all, he never raised a hand to her, and in his darkest moments, when the weight of his own vindictiveness grew too bitter to bear, he would sit beside her, head bowed, and ask her to write his name, not in scorn, but to remind him who he was before the world made him cruel. Often, he would fall asleep at her feet, and she would cradle his head in her lap, fingers gently brushing his hair as if tending a dying fire. In those rare moments of quiet, when his breath slowed and the venom drained from his voice, she saw not the prince of spite, but the broken boy beneath. Death, stabbed through the heart by his twin, Nahlor Vreed, during a masquerade. She wore his own discarded mask and struck in silence, a blade of mirror glass driven between his ribs as the crowd applauded what they thought was performance. Nahlor, once his closest confidant and mirror in Cruelty, had vanished years prior after a scandal Vreed orchestrated erased her name from court. Her return was neither for revenge nor redemption, but to prove that even spite cannot outlive its echo. He died laughing, recognizing the irony with pride. Those who witnessed it, masked nobles, sycophants, and would-be rivals, felt their mirth curdle into dread. The laughter was not just defiance, but a final curse, echoing in the vaulted hall long after the masquerade ended. Some guests fled the ballroom in tears, swearing they had seen their own faces in Nahlor's mask. Others refused to speak of the event, fearing that to name him in death was to invite his memory back. Whispers soon replaced applause, and mirrors were covered in noble manners for fear they might reflect more than appearances. That night marked the beginning of a new superstition. Never laugh at a masquerade, lest the thorn-tongued air laugh with you. In his final moments, as the mask slipped from Nahlor's face and the pain bloomed behind his ribs, his thoughts did not turn to vengeance or fear. Instead, they drifted to Vrin. He wondered if she would still write his name. He hoped she would not forgive him. And in that final breath, laced with blood and laughter, he remembered the boy he had once been, before the world taught him to sharpen love into a blade. Vrin's fate. After his death, Vrin vanished into the old salt ruins of Brynhold, returning to the place of her severance. Some say she carved every one of his recorded lies into the bones of the orphan sanctum's walls before sealing the chamber with silence. Glyphs and vanishing beneath the sea mist. Others believe she carries Spitelash now, wrapped in mourning silk, visiting each noble whose name once darkened Nahlor's tongue, reminding them in wordless glances that legacy is not absolution. Though mute, her presence stirs dread. Those who see her report dreams of their own betrayals, and in the ash markets, some whisper she is not mourning him, but waiting. For what? None can say. But her gaze is said to be heavier than guilt and softer than grief, a weight only the wicked recognize. Legacy. Every pale noble now wears a thorn under their tongue to ward off his return. But the aftermath of his death went deeper than superstition. Court behavior changed subtly, yet irrevocably. Laughter became a guarded act. Masks were redesigned to be transparent. Dueling academies shifted their teachings from flamboyant cruelty to pragmatic defense, though the mark of merit tradition persisted, now more desperate, more theatrical. Nobles began shaping their scars with sharper intent, some branding themselves with thorn glyphs beneath the horsehair to echo his memory, as if to summon or defy him. On the anniversary of his death, scar feasts are held in secret, ritual meals where nobles bleed onto mirrored plates and drink to spite and survival. The scar-shaping parlors, once hidden, became salons of pilgrimage. To bear a mark now is not merely to claim victory, it is to claim inheritance. Young duelists began crafting scars with an almost theatrical intentionality, often imitating the legends they idolized. It became common to hear court poets recite verses about Theris Malcrane's gaze of irony, or Eneth Caro's deadly invitation line as inspiration for stylized cuts. New academies emerged that offered scarecraft lessons, blending swordplay with aesthetic mutilation. Chief among them was the Bleeding Gate Atelier, founded within a repurposed mausoleum near Hollow Marrow Hall. Its instructors were retired duelists, each bearing notorious scars and titles. Lessons began at midnight and were conducted in silence, save for the scraping of blades and the murmur of pain as critique. Another, the Mirror Crag Tactica, emphasized psychological warfare alongside blade work, teaching students how to unnerve opponents with calculated elegance. There, mirrors lined the dueling halls, and students were graded not only on strikes, but on the poise of their expression as they delivered or received wounds. The Vainlash Conservatory, more secretive, trained nobles in poison etiquette and scarecraft embroidery, where scars were inlaid with memory ink to tell silent stories. These famed duelists became icons, their scars featured in tapestries, memory vignettes, and court dramas. One of the most celebrated was Sir Kithrian Vask, a graduate of the Mirror Crag Tactica, whose scar was a precise lattice across his cheeks, achieved during the infamous Duel of Echoed Blades. Kithrian faced his former mentor, Lady Verisa Cairn, in a mirror-walled chamber designed to disorient and reflect. The duel, fought in complete silence, ended with Kithrian carving a mirrored X across his own face as a final feint, blinding Verisa with blood and light before disarming her. The scar, deliberately symmetrical, became a symbol of self-mastery and sacrifice. After the duel, Mirror Crag revised its curriculum to include mirror play, an advanced psychological maneuver named in his honor. Kithrian's duel became required viewing for all first-year duelists. As for Lady Verisa Cairn, her fate was a study in contrast. Disgraced and stripped of her titles, she did not vanish from public life. Rather, she re-emerged as a ritual duelist for court performances, turning her defeat into haunting theater. Her face, permanently etched with the blood-borne spiral of Kithrian's mirrored X, became a living symbol of tragic brilliance. She never taught again, but her wordless appearances at scar feasts became tradition. Nobles whispered that she spoke only through her scar now, and that to trace its shape was to hear the scream she never uttered. Her legacy influenced a new wave of noble ritual, the silent oath, in which duelists vow not to speak until their scars are answered in kind. Mirror-themed dueling masks surged in popularity, and mirrored hallways became part of elite manners as both challenge and homage. Pain, silence, and spectacle became indistinguishable in court ritual, and Lady Verisa, scarred, mute, and still, was hailed as the matron ghost of mirrored loss, and his scar was immortalized in glass relief above the academy gates, alongside the phrase, "Truth is drawn in pain." Dueling culture no longer prized just skill, but expression, where pain became punctuation. Some aspiring nobles went so far as to duel mirrors, seeking the perfect angle of cut that would echo their chosen legend. In imitating the infamous, they preserved and distorted them, ensuring that cruelty passed down as both ritual and art. Even in death, Nahlor's cruelty remained fashionable. His memory bled into ceremony, turning pain into pageantry and silence into legacy. And though time dulled the sound of his name, none forgot the man he became at the end. Face still flawless, untouched by age or regret, save for the elegant scar that whispered of youth and cruelty. In an era where scars shouted status, his remained a hushed legend. Portraits painted posthumously often failed to capture the calm malice in his gaze or the faint smile that hovered like a curse. To those who saw him last, his beauty was unbearable. Death had claimed his breath, but not his grace, leaving behind a vision so composed it unsettled even the proudest lords. In death, as in life, Nahlor Vreed remained an aesthetic contradiction, a monster shaped like a saint. His posthumous portraits, despite the skill of their creators, could never quite replicate the gravity of his presence. Artists argued for decades over the tilt of his smile, the precise silver of his scar, or the haunted light in his gaze. Nobles commissioned dozens of interpretations, each one more stylized than the last. Some portraying him as martyr, others as demon, some a beautiful ghost behind glass. The most famous hangs in the Hall of Thorns, a painting framed in bone ivory, depicting Nahlor asleep on Vrin's lap beneath a canopy of bleeding roses, his hand curled loosely as if dreaming of ruin. His scar, aglow with subtle ink lacquer, catches candlelight like a whisper. It is said that those who stare too long into the painting recall regrets not their own. In this way, even art became haunted by his aesthetic, beauty honed sharp enough to bleed. Later generations, desperate to embody his legacy or expunge its shadow, created dueling masks based on his death mask, and stylized scars mimicking his became fashionable among noble youth. But none could replicate the contradiction he embodied. His image became not just history, but prophecy, a warning written in elegance and blood. The famed painting, titled The Spiteful Repose, was rendered by Morlayan Thist, a one-eyed albino painter known for capturing emotion through absence. A veteran of the Thorned schism and former memory scribe, Thist had long abandoned traditional portraits, claiming mirrors were too honest to reveal the truth. Using bone ivory as canvas and mixing pigments with ash, dried roseblood, and whale gray inks, he created a visual elegy that haunted its viewers. Thist painted Nahlor in perfect stillness, laid across Vrin's lap beneath a cascade of thorn blossoms that weep blood onto his robes. His face, untouched by time, bears the famous silver scar, aglow with lacquer that flickers like living memory. Against his alabaster skin and white hair, the scar shimmered like a sacred wound, clarifying to all that he was an albino, a son of Ivory Thorns, marked not just by cruelty, but by bloodline. Vrin, behind him, is not fully shown, only her veiled silhouette and one outstretched hand, ink-stained, fingers resting on his brow as if sealing a story. The light in the painting is soft, unnatural, as if cast by the dying dream of a candle. Thist claimed he painted it in complete silence, blindfolded during its final strokes. When asked why, he answered, "He haunts best when you do not look directly." Upon its unveiling, 4 nobles fainted, though whether from guilt, awe, or theater is still debated. One confessed a hidden crime, another took a vow of silence, and a third attempted to steal the painting's reflection. It was promptly entombed in the Hall of Thorns, hidden behind a mirror pane and flanked by thorn-choked braziers. It can only be viewed through reflection, never directly, fitting, perhaps, for a man who was always more myth than flesh, and still, it waits. Visitors report shivers, dreams, regret they swear isn't theirs. But maybe that's just art. Or maybe, like all great beauty in Ivory Thorns, it punishes you for looking. Thanks for venturing into the storm with me. Every tale in this universe, from the shattered kingdoms to the cursed bloodlines, I write myself. All the art, all the visuals, every drop of atmosphere you feel, that's shaped by hand and pieced together with my passion to create. These stories take a lot of time to make real, so thank you for your patience when the drops take longer than I'd like. If you felt something during this journey, if you got goosebumps, held your breath, or just needed a break from the noise of the real world, do me a solid. Like the video, subscribe for more, and share it with a nerdy friend who needs to touch grass or get scorched by Atlas's lightning. Your support keeps this storm alive.